The following talk, entitled The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali by Dr. Renée Weber, is presented by the Theosophical Society in America.
The first thing, of course, that one wants to know, before, many of you perhaps have never heard of Patanjali, and so before I enter into the exposition of his Yoga Sutras, I feel that I ought to set him for you in time and space. He is, of course, Indian, and he forms part of the 6 major systems of Hindu philosophy, known as the classical systems of Hindu philosophy. And these occur mostly as pairs. The 6 systems are called darshanas, and darshana means a point of view. It's a way, one way, really, of looking at reality, a point of view with regard to all the many points of view that one can have in reflecting about the nature of the universe and man's place within it. And so Patanjali forms one such part. He belongs together with somebody else called Kapila. I've written that there on the board, who lived about 800 B.C. Patanjali lived about 2nd century B.C. It's very hard to date him exactly. And Patanjali gave us the Yoga Sutras. He systematized them, and all of these rest on a system known as Sankhya in Indian philosophy. And so Sankhya Yoga, they're usually treated together, form a pair. They are 2 aspects of the 6 traditional classical systems of Indian philosophy. Now, Sankhya means enumeration, and it addresses itself basically to the content of the viewpoint of which yoga constitutes the method. So the Sankhya being the content or the enumeration of certain features, which we will talk about today, of reality, and yoga is the method by means of which one can realize the content that is implicit in Sankhya. Yoga rests on the metaphysics of Sankhya. Patanjali then is not the founder of yoga. Yoga is far older, and much of its views about the universe, about the nature of man, about man's role in the universe and his philosophical goal, if you like, or his goal in life viewed philosophically, much of that has been around for thousands of years, certainly in the Orient. But Patanjali is credited with systematizing the central, the indispensable, let us say, sutras, aphorisms as they're sometimes translated, of yoga. Sutra really means a thread, like a thread that strings together, that holds together a group of beads. And there are 196 of these sutras of Patanjali. When Patanjali first wrote them down, he had gathered together these, which had been passed on for many, many centuries in an oral tradition, from master to chela, from guru, that is, to chela, from master to pupil. And at that time, obviously long before the age of print, the pupils had to memorize all 196 of these sutras, and they knew them very, very well. But all the more so because some of the material that I'll present for you this afternoon might seem very rigorous, very strenuous in its loftiness and its nobility. Therefore, I think at the outset I ought to remind all of us that the sutras were originally formulated to be taught to, memorized by monks, holy men who had already, to some large degree, renounced the world and had set for themselves the avowed goal of discovering what is ultimate in the universe and to realize within themselves, within their own lives, to transform themselves, to embody this ultimate principle. And so the Yoga Sutras are very condensed, they're very cryptic, because only the absolute core, the indispensable aspect of Sankhya and yoga philosophy was contained in these, because since this was part of an oral tradition, the monks, by evoking just a word or two, a key word as it were, called to mind the content, much larger content that lay behind these cryptic sutras, and as it were could summon up in their own lives, in their own mind, all the rest, all the elaboration or exposition, which in any case they spend their lives in pondering and trying to live. Therefore, and I think that's something I want to say before I launch too deeply into the material itself, therefore the sutras themselves, the virtual record of this whole system, are to me very remarkable. And while I'm on this subject, I would like, because I'm a tremendous enthusiast of this particular book, to recommend to anybody who is interested or might become interested in Patanjali as a result of today's lecture, this particular book, I think, is by far the best. It's called The Science of Yoga by I.K. Taimni, Taimni, and it's really the most exact rendition of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali into English. It has the original Sanskrit, it has a transliteration of the Sanskrit that might not interest everybody. Then it has a very careful translation of the sutra from Sanskrit into colloquial English. And lastly, it has a very large body of commentaries attempting to explain to the Western mind and to the 20th century mind what Patanjali Sutras are about. And this, by the way, is a quest book, and since Dora mentioned the bookshop, they have it. But, and I suppose I'm a good salesman for this book, because I use this book in my own course at Rutgers University. And I have found that however difficult, it's not an easy book, it is, my students find they're quite willing to wade through so much difficult material, because the book exerts a tremendous fascination on people. It is so rich and it is so deep that one knows almost from the first sutra on that there is more here than one can possibly absorb at first glance or even at third glance or readily. And as I tell my students, it isn't necessary to understand every single of the 196 sutras, but those that do strike for you a chord in your own life and in your own search will find that you can go very deeply into these particular sutras through the Taimni book, which, as I said, I find is classical. It's the best. The tone of the sutras is in itself remarkable, and I'd like to say something about them. Patanjali Sutras are so impersonally phrased. They seem so detached and so sober and down to earth and restrained in their language, at the same time discussing the most profound spiritual principles of which one could think, that I think that the conjunction of these two, or if you like the contrast,